Okay. Okay. There's no one in the public gallery, so I don't need to advise them in relation to their mobile devices. Move to agenda item 1, members. An apology has been received from the committee chair, Mr. Mike Nesbitt, who is in Washington for St. Patrick's Day celebrations. Apologies have also been received from Alex Atwood, Megan Fearn and Stephen Mudry. Are members aware of any other apologies? No? Okay. Agenda item 2, then, members. At page 5 of your packs, you will see a letter from Dr. Frawley thanking the committee and staff for our work on completing the legislative process of the NIPSO bill. Are members content to respond to Dr. Frawley to thank him for his contribution to the legislation and wish him well in the next chapter of his life? Okay. And are members content to forward Dr. Frawley's correspondence to the relevant Assembly staff? Great, thank you. At page 6 of your packs, members, you will see a letter from Anna Lowe, chairperson of the Chairperson's Liaison Group, seeking the committee's views on the merits of establishing a European committee. Alternatively, the new committee for the Executive Office could consider establishing a subcommittee for European issues in the next Assembly mandate. Do members have any comments or wish to issue a response to the Chairperson's Liaison Group? Alex, you're very welcome.
Sure.
Item of business is in relation to a request from the Chairperson's Liaison Group on the committee's views with regards to the merits of establishing a European committee in the new mandate.
Yeah.
I know from my point of view, we had previously visited Scottish Parliament and seen a European committee work effectively there. Members have any views in relation to that?
Not enough support that idea.
Yeah. You think it merits consideration? Members, okay. If members are content, we'll write back to Chairperson's Liaison Group and agree that the establishment of a European committee does merit consideration. Yep. Okay. Thank you. At page 7 of your packs there, members, you will see an invitation to a Collaboration NI conference, which is to be held in the Lough Neagh Discovery Centre on Thursday, the 19th of May. Members wishing to attend should contact Collaboration NI directly. At page 10 of your packs, you will see the committee's current list of invitations. Okay. In terms of end of mandate arrangements, members, there are a number of housekeeping items that we need to consider in respect of the end of the mandate. The first of these relates to the minutes of today's meeting, as we won't be together again to agree them as normal. Are members content that in the absence of any further meetings of the committee that I as Deputy Chairperson will agree the draft minutes of this meeting on behalf of the committee? Great. Thanks. In terms of correspondence, members, committee staff will forward any correspondence received between now and dissolution for members' information. I believe dissolution is Tuesday, 29th of March. Yep. Okay. Are members content that a standard letter will be issued to correspondence stating that the Committee for the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister has no further meetings scheduled before the Assembly dissolves on 29th of March 2016, but that the correspondence has been forwarded to members of the committee for information? Great. Members, it is normal practice for committees to delegate authority to the chairperson and deputy chairperson to submit views on the releasing or withholding of information in any non-routine, non-contentious FOI requests received during periods of recess. The committee will be advised of any such requests, the views expressed by the chairperson and or the deputy chairperson, and the response issued by the FOI unit by email. This will be the case until the Assembly dissolves on the 29th of March. Any Freedom of Information requests received after dissolution will be dealt with by the FOI unit directly. Are members content with that arrangement? Great. Okay, are members content that the incoming committee for the Executive Office is permitted access to committee papers from this mandate, should it request so in the new mandate? Great. Okay then, members, item 3 is our draft minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of March, which begin at page 13. Are members content to agree the draft minutes of the meeting of 9th of March?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you. Item 4 then, matters arising. List of outstanding correspondence begins at page 20. Do members have any comments? No. Content?
Content.
Okay. Agenda item 5. The summary sheet at page 22 details the correspondence received by the committee since we last met. Members, at page 24, you will find a response from the Speaker to the Chair of the Joint Committee on Human Rights regarding the devolved administration's contribution to the UK Government's consultation on its proposal to repeal the Human Rights Act and replace it with a British Bill of Rights. Do members have any comments? The response from the Speaker sets out the nature of an Assembly motion that was agreed in the Assembly in relation to this issue, and he has forwarded that to the Joint Chair. Are members content? Yeah. Okay. Okay, members, at page 27 you will find correspondence from the Department with regards to the appointment of Mr Eddie Lynch as the new Commissioner for Older People. Are members content to note? I'm sure members will be familiar with the work of Eddie Lynch as CEO of Age Sector Platform and the work that he's done on the Pensioners Parliament. Would it be appropriate for the committee to write to him to congratulate him as well? Is that members be content with that? Yeah. Okay. Responsibility for older people is transferring to
Department of Communities.
Department of Communities. Okay. Okay, members, thanks. The Equality Commission for Northern Ireland, then, at page 30, you will find correspondence from the Justice Committee regarding an issue around an allegation of discrimination on the grounds of philosophical belief by a member of the public. Are members content to forward this correspondence to OFMDFM and ask that they correspond directly with the member of the public on this matter? Agreed. Okay, you will find correspondence from OFMDFM regarding the opening of the Together Building a United Community Summer Camps programme for 2016-17 at page 3 of your table papers to note. Do members wish to raise any matters relating to this correspondence or content to note? Thank you. Okay, members, agenda item 6 is the Public Services Ombudsman salary. We are due to consider the Salaries Public Services Ombudsman Order Northern Ireland 2016. Clerk's brief is at page 34 and the order can be found at page 36 of your pack. The order is subject to negative resolution procedure and will provide for a salary of £92,000 per annum for the new Public Services Ombudsman. The committee considered the proposal at its meeting on the 2nd of March 2016 and agreed that it was content for the rule to be made. The Assembly Commission has confirmed that there have been no changes to the policy content following the committee's consideration of the SL1. While the examiner has not reported formally, he has indicated that he has no comments to make by way of technical scrutiny. That's at table papers page 5. Do members have any comments or content for me to put the question? Content? Okay, I'll formally put the question then, that the Committee for the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister has considered the Salaries Public Services Ombudsman Order Northern Ireland 2016 and has no objections to the order. Agreed? Thank you. Okay, agenda item 10 then, members. I now turn to an additional item which has been added to the agenda following receipt of correspondence from the department yesterday, which you will find at page 8 of your table papers. This relates to a proposal to make a statutory rule to amend the Sex Discrimination Northern Ireland Order 1976 to address concerns raised by the EU Commission. The Department undertook an 8-week consultation which ended on the 29th of January. The proposals are technical in nature and therefore the following OFMDFM officials are here today to brief us. Martina Hanna and David McGowan. You're very welcome, folks. If you want to make your initial comments.
Yes, first of all, Deputy Chair, could I thank the committee for hearing this today. It's really, really appreciated by us because of the amount of work that we've been doing to actually tidy up these amendments and get them cleared before the end of this particular mandate and the end of this session. So I'm going to explain it in very, very simple terms, what the impact will be, first of all, the consultation, and indeed what happens next, if that's acceptable to you.
Yep.
So the recast directive, as you rightly point out, it's an EU directive, and it really is so that we're complying with certain issues that they see of importance in a particular way. They had set out quite some time ago 10 areas of concern that they had, and we've addressed all of these. The remaining one is this one on the table today. And what they had put forward was an EU pilot investigation, as it's referred to ensure compliance with what they were asking us to do. But in very, very simple terms, basically what these amendments will do is they will create a single definition of direct discrimination in terms of employment and occupation. There are currently 2 definitions within the regulations, and this doesn't change those definitions, it just brings them into a single definition. The second one is that it will create a single definition in terms of indirect discrimination. And again, that brings it into one. It doesn't change what's there, it just brings it into one neat definition. And thirdly, and very importantly, it inserts a new article to provide protection from indirect discrimination on the ground of gender reassignment. Currently, there is an insert there that protects on direct discrimination, but this brings it in to match with the other 2 definitions. It's really as simple as that. The consultation, as you've quite rightly alluded to, it finished at the end of January, and there were 4 responses to that consultation. The ECNI and NICEM, which is the Northern Ireland Council for Ethnic Minorities, in their response they wanted us to be more broad in the opportunity to change the regulations on a much wider basis. However, for the terms of this, we need to comply with what the EU are telling us to do, and we can apply these now and neatly. This will tidy up the regulations for this part of this particular mandate, and as we move then into the new mandate, these regulations will sit with the new Department for Communities, and we will inform the new committee at that stage of what has happened to date and what else we are doing in terms of gender equality and other areas that we're responsible for in equality terms. And then just finally, I think the impact that these will have, it's really just technical. It's quite technically set out in the letter, but those are the simple impacts of those technicalities.
Okay, thank you for your briefing today. Can I just ask you to explain again the reason for the timing of today's proposal and further explanation as to how exactly the regulations will be dealt with by the Department for Communities and what involvement the new committee for the Department of Communities will have?
Well, the timing in this particular case, you will have been aware that we had advised the committee prior to Christmas that we would be going out to public consultation on the matter, and we set out for the committee the actual technicalities at that stage. Since the end of the consultation period, which was in January, there was a period of time when we had to consult with our departmental solicitor's office, simply because of the additional things that we were being asked to do. But because those additional things have not been publicly consulted on, it would be technically incorrect for us to move to do those things now. We need to have further discussions with the new department, with the new department's committee. But this, in the meantime, enables what is very much a directive from the Commission to do these technical amendments, to neaten those up, tidy those up and get them done. But it has more or less been a timing issue. It has not been an issue of delay, it has been a timing issue with the consultation and then analysing those consultation responses.
Okay. And will you be seeking an opportunity to brief the new committee for the Department of Communities on the wider gender equality provisions at the earliest possible opportunity?
Absolutely. As policy lead for gender equality, I'm actually moving to the new Department for Communities. So it's to the benefit of our policy area that we advise the Minister, the new Permanent Secretary, and indeed the committee of what our intentions are in terms of gender equality. So yes, we will be doing that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Bring members in for questions. Alec Maskey.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Martina, for that. Could I ask, this is very clearly us meeting our compliance requirements.
It's meeting our compliance requirements, but it's also putting in terms of gender reassignment, it's actually tidying up the regulations to make them match what is generally afforded to everyone else.
So it's generally seen as a positive, but it's also meeting our requirements, but it's positive as well.
It's positive.
Could I ask, you referred to the ECNI and the...
Sorry, can I just ask, I can only hear you if I see your face, so if your hand's up I can't. Apologies, I should have said.
My apologies. In terms of the correspondence from the ECNI and ICM, is my understanding that some of the issues that they've raised are out with the scope of these particular regulations?
Yes, at this moment, yes.
At this moment in time?
Yeah.
And do they understand that?
They will understand that, but quite rightly, they've seen this as an opportunity that maybe we should be going broader than that. But because of where we are and because of how we've consulted on these regulations, it allows us to make necessary amendments, and then we can take cognizance of what they have said to us as we move forward. And we will be listening to that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Members, are members content then with the proposal for the rule? Great. Yep. Okay. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
It's okay. Wish you well with the ongoing work in the new department.
Oh, thank you very much. We're looking forward to it.
Okay, members. Agenda item 7 is our briefing from representatives from Regenerate on their work in relation to flags protocol in Portadown and other areas. In your packs you will find a clerk's brief at page 38, a copy of the Regenerate request to brief the committee at page 39, Regenerate flags protocol at page 40, and a copy of an OFMDFM response to the committee's request for an update on the review of the flags protocol as outlined in the Stormont House Agreement at page 55. Very glad to welcome representatives from Regenerate to our meeting today. I think we have Mr. Keith McCann, Strategic Development Worker at Regenerate, and Mr. John Stevenson, Committee Member at Regenerate. Do you want to make your presentation, gentlemen? Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much to the Chair and the Committee for hearing our voices today. One of the key ethoses that Regenerate have is to ensure that the voices of people on the ground who decisions are made about and impact our lives mostly are brought to the table and their voices are heard. So I guess part of what we want to say today is a reflection of the communities that we work in. Regenerate is a community development group based in Portadown, and we tackled various issues: cohesion, education, capacity within community. But today we're here to talk about a flags protocol that we drafted and was published in June 2015 with the consensus of those folk who put flags up and take them down in the Portadown area. I'm going to hand over to John now, my colleague, and John will take you through something just about that protocol, its impact in Portadown, and also its wider reach throughout other areas and interests from different parts of Northern Ireland.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Yeah, just where we started with the protocol was probably a couple of years ago. There was a lot of background work was done, relationship building, before we actually got to put something in black and white on paper. And probably, to be honest about it, before we felt confident as a group of people that had came together across the local community within Portadown, we felt we had to be sure and confident before we went public with it. And there was a bit of to and fro and negotiating to get to that point. But the relationships were built. Last June, May, June, we went to a public consultation within the community. And it was very public. It was open to everyone to come. statutory bodies came to it, council, local politicians, police, local community groups, cultural groups, and they're all given their chance at that point to have a say and have an input to the document that we put out publicly. The reception that we got was pretty much favourable to what we were trying to do. We published the document in the press, through the media. And the most important thing to say about the document, at that stage, it was very much a pilot programme. We were pretty confident within ourselves where it was going to go over the summer months, but the proof was in the pudding. Come the end of what was the set time frame for flying of flags, every single flag came down, and that was the evidence. And the evidence base is why we're sitting here today, and why we feel that the community involvement from the grassroots level, from the ground up, is so important to getting these protocols in place. And that's really what we're just trying to push across here today.
Okay. Do you want to go into any more detail in terms of the nature of the protocol?
Okay, so what the protocol set parameters for the flying of flags in Portadown within the areas we work. And it gave a start date when it will be acceptable for flags to go up on a rough duration, a period that they would stay up, and then a date for those flags to come down again. And I suppose one of the key factors in pulling the protocol together was to inject some logic and also some respect into the whole debate around flags, and get communities and people to understand why and question themselves even why they fly flags in the first place, and how that should be done. So broadly, the protocol also then put in a complaints procedure. So if there were residents or there were communities and there were issues around flags, and there were one or two minor issues, that they could approach a group, and that issue would be taken seriously, would go through a process, and if flags need to be taken down and moved or readjusted in some way, well, that mechanism also was in place. But primarily, the main importance of the protocol was to give a timely period for the expression of, as people would see, their culture, and so that the town wasn't littered with tattered rags for a long period into December and so on.
So is that,
that's the broad.
Is that at least one element of the starting point, that there was an understanding that there is potentially a problem to respond to in terms of the display of tattered flags?
I think certainly from Regenerate's point of view, that's what really drew our attention to the issue at the start, was the fact that when we began the protocol, in fact before the protocol was launched, our volunteers went out and we took down 150 tattered flags in Portadown. Now those flags had flown from the previous year, so they've been up all year, and we didn't want to see that. And we wanted, as I said, to interject some sort of logic into the whole debate around flying of flags. Yeah.
Hopefully members will want to come on here today and have a good discussion with you as much as anything else, and you're very welcome. It's an issue that I have done a bit of work on, and I welcome the efforts that, and the hard work that has been made to try and make progress in relation to an issue that there are problems in relation to. I think people, I just happen to be in the chair today, but I think people think I make up that people contact me to raise concerns in relation to this issue, but I genuinely get a lot of correspondence in relation to tattered flags, in relation to the length of displays, from traders as well, in particular, in terms of ensuring that areas are perceived to be open and welcoming to all, because an open and welcoming area is essential for business. So those are kind of the issues that motivate me, and which are in many ways similar to yourselves. And the work that you do you said that you looked at why the flags are established? The start and finish date, or is it June to September roughly?
June to the 7th of September.
Okay. And well, I suppose two parts to the question then. What are some of the reasons that people display the flags on the lampposts, and why is that particular time frame selected?
Traditionally, for cultural reasons, I wouldn't say historical reasons, but certainly cultural reasons, in around July, the parading season, it starts before June. The particular dates that were picked was on agreement with everyone that sat in the room that we facilitated to bring together. And there was many people and diverse opinions in that room to get to a point where we were able to actually get to some sort of agreement. Probably people sitting in a room that didn't even want to be with each other in that room, but they're still there. As recent as last night, we had a meeting again with 30 people, representative right across the town, who are involved in putting flags up, but also involved in taking them down. And the consensus is still there. We've done that specifically before we came here today, so I'm here with some confidence. Flags go up for cultural reasons. They go up for other reasons as well. We're aware of that. We wanted to try, as Keith has said, to put some sort of respect around how they're flown. And that was key at the very start, to get that into everyone's minds that was involved in putting up flags for whatever reason, that was the only reason they should be going up for the right reason, and to do it respectfully to all communities. Beyond that, it probably grew out into what became the flag protocol, which is still a live document. We have looked at that protocol at the end of September. We had a meeting. We had a meeting again at the start of the year, and we followed it up with a meeting last night, specifically last night, looking at some of the commemorations that are basically due to come up, and we're looking specifically at Easter, and to make sure that there's no sort of reaction to maybe what other communities might do with flags. So we're looking ahead, we're looking to build the protocol, we're looking to extend the protocol to other areas.
You know, having considered the issue myself, the issue of consultation, I think, is one of the most challenging aspects of it. So you mentioned public consultation yourself. How do you ensure that consultation is as inclusive as it can possibly be? What methods do you use to try and satisfy that? And do you analyse the breakdown of responses? Do you endeavour to seek responses from particular groups?
I think the initial consultation that went out when we launched the flag document was basically done very publicly via the media. It was put in the local press. We used social media pages, invites to all organisations, people who may have an interest, and that's the way we did it. It was the only way we had to do it at that point. There's probably scope for further widening of that consultation, and no one's saying we shouldn't do that or we should do it. That's open for debate. And we're pretty open. We've been pretty open with this protocol, the reasons for it, why we did it, and we've nothing to run away from. Public consultation is welcome.
I suppose the other challenge is that, excuse me, they're having. Sorry, I might grab a bit of water here. Apologies. Having looked at the existing legislation and in relation to the display of flags, there doesn't seem to be a way to gain statutory permission for the display of flags. It's quite a difficult area of operation, and also obviously the Northern Ireland Life and Time Survey, which is used by the OFMDFM Committee in terms of good relations indicators. Year on year, when people are asked the question, do they believe flags should be displayed on lampposts in their street, will say no to the, excuse me, thank you, to around 80% of people, which admittedly means there's 20% of people who say yes, we would like to do that. So how do we, given that scale, how do you ensure that there is full consultation across the board? And do you mentioned in terms of complaints procedure, residents, an opportunity for residents to object. What exactly does that complaints procedure look like, and how many types of complaints or objections would you have received?
Last year, we had 2 representations. One was from a resident, and a second was from an anonymous person through the local media. The complaint through the local media we didn't take forward because we were not able to verify who that person, group or entity was. The complaint from the local resident, flags were taken down and moved, and it was a very simple, practical thing. It was a lady, an elderly lady. The flags were fluttering in the wind at night, and it disturbed her sleep. And flags were taken and moved to the opposite side of the road, and that resolved that issue. But all of what we did last year and all of what we have done now is really a basis to move forward, to strengthen and widen and improve and secure for the future also. So realistically, last year was the pilot. We have learned from that, and we move forward into this year now as well to see how we can strengthen and make the whole policy and procedure more robust. And that, I guess, means that the consultation and representation, even in terms of people who fly flags, the group begins to get bigger as we, expand that out, not just in Portadown, but we've had requests from a number of different other areas across Northern Ireland to advise them.
If I'm a resident or a trader, and I'm of the 70 to 80% of people who don't, for whatever reason, believe that a lamppost is a place from which to display a flag, how do I go about raising that position? Who do I raise that with? How do I go about doing that?
Yes. Locally in Portadown, how we're managing that is our contact details have been published on our Facebook page and also on the local media stories, and the media ran this story almost nearly every week or every other week throughout the summer of last year. So the contact details are out there for folk, and they can then come to us. Or alternatively, what we do find, the example of the lady who was an elderly lady, that came through one of the local councillors, and the councillor approached our group, and then we responded to that.
Okay. Is there a criteria against which you consider the objections in order to decide what your response to the objections are?
Reasonable and rational requests will be accommodated. Yeah.
Okay. And in terms, from my point of view, I think the framework to guide us in relation to this should be open, transparent, respectful, time-bound display of flags, and I can see how much of those principles and framework is behind
Yes.
some of the work that you're doing. Has there been any engagement with statutory agencies who have, I presume, ownership of many of the structures in which the flags would be displayed, and responsibility for setting flags protocols? I think in particular OFMDFM is obviously responsible for the flags protocol that I think they've been reviewing since 2005 or 2008. So you've arguably attempted more than what OFMDFM has done on this, but have you engaged with OFMDFM or DRD, who obviously own I would imagine much of the property that the flags are displayed on, with regards to formalising or developing the protocol?
There's been no engagement with DRD at all in relation to flying flags on lampposts or lamppoles. OFMDFM, this is obviously the first input to OFMDFM. Statutory bodies locally, council, housing executive, PSNI, other interested government bodies, they know who we are, they know us as a group from not just working with flags, but working across a range of issues. They know what we're about, they know how to get a hold of us, they can speak to us at any time. And flags has been a discussion at various meetings, among other things. It's not the only thing we deal with. And those avenues are open. to be honest. It's up to the statutory authorities to approach us if they feel it's a statutory matter. What I think we should say is, I've said it earlier and we'll say it again, self-regulation was one of the key words that we picked up from the people that certainly bought into and give support to the flag protocol in Portadown. It was one of the key themes. It would be remiss if we didn't go away from here today and say that as the facilitators, Regenerate being the facilitators of that flag protocol, we don't own it, we're just facilitated it, we've headlined it. There's many groups and many individuals involved in it. Self-regulation was the key theme. Self-regulation, even from the meeting last night, is the way that they see it going. We'll talk about government legislation. There is legislation already in place which, for whatever reason, hasn't been enforced or can't be enforced. You know, that's for people to decide and debate reasons. We're not here to do that. All we're trying to do is say there is a template, it's evidence-based, it has worked, it can be improved upon, and it's expanding out across the greater regional area, so you need to bear those things in mind. But the door is open, you know.
No, and self-regulation or community-led responses are obviously, you know, a theme that has been forwarded often. You do accept, however, that the issue being self-regulated does have direct, explicit responsibility from Department for Regional Development and OFMDFM. So would you say they haven't contacted you? Have you made any attempt to contact those bodies, or would you welcome engagement with those bodies on this issue?
There's been no attempt to contact any statutory body in relation to land flags and lampposts such as DRD until today with the OFMDFM.
Okay.
Again, the door's open. These bodies need to be speaking to the communities. I know that they speak to the various politicians and the various political parties at time to time about these issues, but they need to be taking the view of the communities involved.
Okay. Is there any funding support for the work, for example?
Well, I've never requested funding support for it. Funding helps oil the wheels of any issue and any project, there's no doubt about that. We're not here to talk about funding.
Okay.
Just here to evidence what we have done and put that on the table.
And
hopefully that'll be taken forward.
Try and bring other members in here quickly as well, but why do you think the significant difference in relation to your protocol and flag display in other areas, as far as I would see, is that start and finish date? Why do you think that start and finish date has been adhered to under your protocol when it isn't in other areas? And do you need to, have you had any need to, outside of those dates, be involved in removal?
No.
Okay.
And I think the reason that it stuck was very much because of some of the relationship building that was done a year before and sometimes 2 years before. And one of the most important things, it's no disrespect to politicians, but the politicians who were involved in it, there was politicians involved in it, but they had to take their political hat off. And that was made very clear from the start. Don't destroy the whole issue at an early stage of politics. That has to be said. Not that there wasn't political input, but it was political input on a personal level. And that was very important to make it happen. And that's why it stuck, to a degree.
And finally, I suppose, whilst there, in terms of the types of principles that I set out that I think are useful to apply in these situations, in terms of openness and transparency, which is often raised with me, is the matter of not knowing who displays the flags. Is there a method for the wider public to know who displays the flags?
There's no method, certainly within our protocol, on knowing people locally and some of the individuals, some of the groups involved. I don't think they would be happy for that being public. These people go out in daylight and put the flags up. People can see them. You know, I'm sure it's the same across the country. But as far as formally saying, yes, we do this, because of the legislation that's in place, people would be, I think, against that idea.
If there was a mechanism for as I said earlier, the difficulty here is there, in multiple answers to questions that I've given, there appears to be no way to gain lawful permission. So if there was a process, do you think people would be willing to record who is involved in the display if there was a permission process?
It's a hypothetical question, to be honest. I think if people were involved in getting to a process or to a point, you may have a chance. I'm just saying you may have a chance of getting that sort of buy-in. At this stage, that threshold still has to be crossed as far as taking the views and opinion of the community, not involving them in the decision making. That's the only way you'll get to that point, Chris.
Do you think there is a point after that where enforcement can be necessary at times? I mean, you call it self-regulation, whatever we call it. Do you think there is a point outside the parameters that's set where removal needs to be an option?
I would say those parameters are already set in place. You know, certainly for if the police deem something to be in breach of the peace, they'll remove a flag off a lamppost or whatever. It may not necessarily be a flag. So there is that mechanism there at the minute. Within certain guidelines that certainly the enforcers obviously would be the police, the PSNI, and they would have to be happy with the circumstances and going in. We know in circumstances where they won't remove flags or emblems or whatever because they don't deem it to be a breach of the peace as such. So, you know, that's one for government at some later date. I think at this stage, if you're going to try and enforce that, it would destroy a lot of the mindset change which is there at the minute. And there is a mindset change, certainly within the community that we operate within, to doing something, changing the way things are done. How far to go with that remains to be seen.
I think it's surprising that OFMDFM, DRD, some of the other bodies that are responsible for this area haven't sought to engage with you further then, but as you say, welcome that we're getting that opportunity to do so today. Can I bring in Alec Maskey?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Keith John, for your presentation. Thank you. First of all, I think it's important to acknowledge our congratulations to yourself for taking this initiative and for spending so much time in relation to it, and then maybe more importantly then coming up to give us your time and your benefit of your experience. It's a very difficult issue, we all know, and certainly from where I've been coming from for a lot of years, most of these things have been best tried to be dealt with more quietly outside of the glare of publicity and all the rest of that, because the sooner you start to have any representative speaking about it, then it gets politicised or polarised, and I've found that to be the case, although I think we're going beyond really that, where politicians have to take more responsibility. Now the balance is, I think as you said, John, yourself, you need to be taking your responsibility as a civic local leader as opposed to party political point scoring in some shape or form, and really addressing concerns. So congratulations for the work that you are involved in. I know it's not easy at all. But I would say that just a couple of things, because clearly there are very fundamental dynamics at work in all of these situations. No doubt that in your own area would have been well in the public eye for a long time, very controversial, very contentious, and I'm not saying you don't hear about it anymore nowadays from it. I'm not suggesting for a second that there aren't difficulties and challenges on the ground, but there don't appear to be anywhere near as acute as they were a number of years ago. That's not to say they don't still require an awful lot of attention and support. But some of us come from, I mean, I was raised in what was nicely called a mixed area when I was growing up as a kid. Flags went up for a couple of weeks and most people accepted that's the nature of it, and then up and down again. Now we actually have them for months. But even to you getting to the point where you have the maximum buy-in of people who are involved in flags, at least there's a start and an end, and some in between there in terms of the protocol, where you fly flags and maybe where you don't fly flags, because a lot of people have different views on this. I mean, Chris mentioned lampposts and stuff like that, but there's also schools, churches and other venues where people think it's best you shouldn't have anything on them, no matter what community you're from. So it's just so I understand that's some people's views, and some people would hold those views as strongly as those who want to put flags up to reflect their culture. Could I ask just a couple of things in terms of, I mean, obviously you've spent a lot of time and effort and you've referred back even up to 2 years of building relationships between those people who are engaged in putting flags. clearly got to a point where people saying, well, as long as nobody's telling us what to do, we'll work out how best to do it ourselves. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's
Simple terms.
you've brought that. And Mayor, in terms of your responses so far, both of you are very pragmatic and sensitive to, other issues. We're dancing around here, we're asking questions, but there's nobody going to poking anybody in the eye, and either the questions are certainly not the answers. So I think it's a very good engagement we're having here. But in terms of, because clearly this would be more of a single identity project, which doesn't make it in any way less important or beneficial. But do you see at any point being able to engage in others who don't share that view and who may want to have their own displays up? Because clearly we're coming into a period where we're going to have the Flags and Identity Commission going around talking to people, and I would like to think and hope that yourself would fully engage in that, because you clearly have the basis of a template, certainly have the basis of engagement, which I think is essential in all of this. So in terms of broadening out the others, could you give us a wee bit of a sense of how other people are taking to the protocols and how they're actually
Also,
working?
Keith, or-
Yeah. Well, we have already engaged with a group from Belfast. I think I recall the name right as BCR, and the work along the interfaces.
Yeah.
Now we have shared with them our protocol, our experience, and they're very keen to take that along the interface areas in Belfast, on both sides of the community and the divide. We have had requests from Lagan Valley. In fact, we're going to attend a meeting on Tuesday night next week to share again the experience. I think, Mr. Maskey, one of the most important things that I think has come out of the flag protocol in Portadown is it has given other communities confidence to even look at this issue and begin to deal with it. Banbridge, Armagh have recently introduced flag protocols as well. So the ABC, the Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon areas, the council area we sit within, most of the major towns now in that area, it's spread out to Ruther Island as well, and some other towns also. So even there was an attempt, and we stepped back from it. On the Garvahi Road in Portadown, there were tricolours and other flags, and one of the local politicians tried to politicise the story, and we stepped back from that because it wasn't what we were about. We were about getting positive agreement. But so we can see where that ripple effect, yes, is starting to go out. As far as Lagan Valley, would you be? I know you had been in some other conversations too.
Yeah. The ripple effect that Keith talks about certainly goes into Belfast, goes right across County Down, County Armagh. There's areas within the Mid-Ulster region into Tyrone who are sitting around tables talking about how this might work for them, and up into South Antrim, maybe Mid-Antrim. So we know from contacts that we have, people we've been speaking to, people who are asking questions about how we did this, how can they make it work for them. And it's different in different areas, maybe a different fit in a different area, and that's up to those people to decide. What we're pretty much up for doing is going and saying, this is how we did it, and this is maybe the best model of practice to start with, but keep it evolving. We're very much aware that there's been protocols put in place before. Some of them worked, some of them didn't work, some of them worked for a year and were let go. We have kept ours very much a live working document, and that's the way we want to keep it. We want to add to it, and we want to improve it, and we want to expand it. So, Alex, as far as speaking to other communities, the door's open to everyone. We've been very clear about that from the start. We'll sit in a room with anyone, with people from within our own community. You had to cross barriers within their own community to sit in a room to get around this issue. And, people who for years and years and years never crossed paths with each other had to make difficult decisions to make this protocol work. So if we can do that within our own community, we can certainly do it across communities. No issues with that.
As I said earlier on there, certainly from an outsider from that particular area, it doesn't in any way dominate. I know there are a lot of problems, but it doesn't in any way dominate maybe the media the way it used to 2 years ago, which is hopefully a good thing. Do you see, as a consequence of the protocol and that ongoing work, because I have no doubt there's a lot of other discussion going on there to get even the protocol that you have managed to get achieved. In terms of impact of broader community relations, I mean, it's got to be a positive thing, I would have thought.
Yeah.
And I would have, in terms of other levels of government, because I can see why the other levels of government will stand up, because they'll take a legal argument, and it's not my responsibility, so I'm not going to go. I would know, I quite expect that there would be quite a number of department officials and all the rest of it who not want to go in their room because they might have to agree something and they don't want to, maybe not be able to either, maybe afraid of it. So it does require political, in my view, and civic leadership. I don't think it requires, and I actually don't believe that any party, whether there's two parties in OFMDFM today, if there's another two parties are in the NMA, they will not have the ability to solve all these problems on their own, and shouldn't even try to, in my view. What they need to do is establish frameworks and give their own civic leadership and party leadership and political leadership. So are there any specific things of support that you think would be helpful to yourselves? And I think you've made your point yourselves, it's not just about money here, it's about other types of support, or, you know, or some kind of a
Just
around yourself and support and civic leadership. Really, I personally believe a lot of it's down to civic leadership and at local and bigger level and that. But I'm asking yourselves, have you thought of any kind of measure of support that would be useful for you? Just forward.
to answer your first comment, Alex, about the area that we work within, maybe not so much in the headlines. There's a reason for that. There's been a lot of work done below the radar, without any assistance, certainly without any statutory assistance or government assistance that has happened. And we've seen that happen, and it's why we got to the point where we're able to bring a protocol out very publicly and make it work. That work is what went. It's still underway. We're involved in it. Other people are involved in it. Yes, there is assistance that we could do with. And it doesn't have to be financial assistance. It could be professional assistance. Public support is very important. People to give protocols or other things like the protocol, be it in relation to bonfires, parades, whatever. It needs that wee bit of fair wind behind it sometimes just to get it moving. We can see that, and it's very important. It's as important as throwing money at it. Sometimes throwing money at a thing isn't the answer. Keith would maybe be more keyed into the development side and the financial side, and how that might look and how that might expand out into the broader community, into other issues and more community relation themed projects.
Yeah.
Say something on that, Keith.
We had some input into Paul and Dominic's report on flags, and one of the issues we spoke to Paul about was that the whole issue of flags and bonfires and interfaces and all of these things, they're so just interwoven through the whole of society. So it ties in education, it ties in economic development and infrastructure into some of the areas as well. And one of the areas in Portadown that sits right on the interface, where if there's ever, I think it was 2 years ago, there was some sort of unrest in that area, but that area has been stripped basically of community centres, even shop units. There's some movement towards regeneration there, but so the whole issue of flags, we think, goes much wider than just flags. It goes to the bread and butter issues too, and one of the causes we want to champion is education, because especially the figures show with PUL boys, and I think from the Catholic community, Catholic boys are I think it's 33% as opposed to 17-18% with Protestant boys, but still only 33% achieving 5 GCSEs with English and Maths is still a lowish figure. So education, we will be thinking, will be something that really needs propped up as well to deal with deprivation and poverty and all of those other issues.
Keith, John.
Thank you.
Okay. Paul, through.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation, your time and your experience, sharing your experiences with us. I can relate to a lot what you say, and I'm glad you actually talked about the interwovenness of all aspects of what people would call culture, but not only that, the bread and butter issues, because I do think they are linked. In my experiences, I suppose, my constituents from Northampton, flags in itself hasn't necessarily been a problem that's bubbled over too much. There are a couple of examples. But my first question is on an aspect whereby the experience I've had over the last number of 10 years on bonfire builders, you always find, I think, that there's a cycle, and bonfire builders usually grow up and they either get a car or a girlfriend, and their influences and their focus changes to a certain degree. Now, flags is slightly different because I think there's a longer age range for flag erecting, and I think that, but with that comes the problem whereby if you engage with a certain type of person at a certain age, very, very quickly after having nailed something down, it disappears because that individual disappears, and then you have to start again afresh with a new raft of people. Is that an experience that you think you will hit whilst you have success now? Is that something that you're preparing for 2-3 years down the line, where you might have a new raft of flag erectors?
Yes, Keith and myself have been heavily involved, going back, certainly myself, 20 years. I can't speak for you, Keith. 6. But heavily involved in community work at grassroots level. Yes, I see that in different organisations that I will be involved in. It comes in generations, and sometimes it's 5-year slots, sometimes it's 10-year. You mentioned the bonfires, same issue there. You're right, once they get to a certain age, most of them drift off. But pretty much like the protocol with the flags, we want to keep it a live document. We are doing a wee bit of work, and it's only pilot work at this stage within our local area around bonfires. We do have a bit of small project towards that. It's a minimal amount across something like 10 bonfires what we're looking at across the whole of the council area. So it's a pretty big regional area, but we've 10 fires that are happy to buy into this project. And it's a management project. It's about trying to put the same sort of structure, the same sort of discipline, and the same sort of respect around how the bonfires operate. Not to do away with them, but to do them properly, that the community can say, yeah, there's a wee change. And I think this year the local community visually, very visually, will see a few wee changes, and hopefully that'll be the catalyst to move on to bigger things next year. We're very aware of the need to keep the process, and that's where government comes in. That's where the assistance comes in.
With all these things, flags itself is something that no one should turn their face away from. But there are a couple of ingredients that are essential. Most essential is confidence. If a system or a community or a person has no confidence, they will not achieve anything. Patience and respect. And if you have those three elements in that mixture, you stand good chance of success in anything we do. Where do you see, where you can influence a group of people, are you concerned that, and we live in the real world, so there's elements out there who maybe have a past in paramilitarism, maybe have moved now on to gangsterism or petty criminal activity at the very least, and they may well have or hold sway and influence in certain individuals or communities areas. Are you frightened that whilst you have the protocol set up and it's working, that those individuals will use it for their own ends to open up a new front in using it as leverage to acquire funding themselves, or to basically blackmail officialdom by saying, well, look, if you don't give us A, B and C here, we will make sure that everything here breaks down, or there will be hell. Are you concerned about influences like that, who are influences of no good, affecting the work that you have been doing, or have you everyone on side, or everyone who's not on side at least stays away?
Certainly locally within our own area, and regionally, even outside of Portadown, within that council area or that council region, key influencers, if we want to call them that, have very much bought into the protocol. There's no particular owner of the protocol, and that's what we've seen as one of the benefits. No one can actually put their name to us. Regenerate have stuck their name to it because we've facilitated it. And there's many disparate groups and people who make up Regenerate, but the protocol is a wider group again. And no one can put their name to that, and that's the success of it. No one can run away and say, we did this, we did that, you need to give us this, that, or the other. They can't do that, because no one has full ownership of it. The community together owns the end result. So that maybe answers that question.
Yeah, no,
and there is difficulties out there, there's no doubt about that. You know.
And again,
people will come on it from different angles.
And that's where a lot of the work and a lot of your work, and I suppose a lot of my work into my area, we do things behind the scenes under the radars, and that gets you far more joy. There was an incident a long number of years ago in the Ballymena area whereby Ballymena, as you'll know, will be a pretty staunch Protestant working class town. Pockets of people who would be of nationalist persuasion and Catholic faith, and there had been times when those small pockets had decided that they wanted to display culture, and they would have put up tricolours and other flags, and there would have been a movement at a time to actually, a determined movement at a time to go in and take down, and that was actually classed by the police as breach of the peace, and there were, if not convictions at that time, there were certainly proceedings by the police. Now, I'm going back a long time, but there is then other areas that the same thing has happened more recent, and main arterial routes have been used, and they would have been mixed. I don't like classing an area as any sort of religious, because a road doesn't have a religion, but that's the way we talk here in Northern Ireland, and that would have been of a mixed denomination in a particular area on that main arterial route, and the police were of sound mind that they were not going to go in to remove flags, and you get a raft of complaints. These were tricolours put up on a main arterial route in a large Protestant area, but that wee pocket was of a nationalist slant. So you can see where you have a raft of complaints, but the police were of mind not to go in and take it out. But they did say that if someone went in to remove a flag, then they could be deemed as breach of the peace. So I asked the police, well, if I wanted to go up and put a Union flag up above or below the other flag on the same lamppost, how would you view that? And they found it harder to answer me, because if they were going to do me for breach of the peace, or whoever was going to do it, breach of the peace, then could they not have done the person who put the flag up in the first place for breach of the peace? So that puzzled them. Now, it never ever materialised that you were going to get a lamppost with two flags on it of different persuasions, but you can understand how the police grapple with this, and road service that grapple with this, and there's all sorts of worries around health and safety and everything else for their personnel, so they all shy away from it. So I'm not necessarily a believer that government has to have any sort of regulation or say in this if the community can work it out. If somebody breaks a law, then clearly the police have a role. How do you view, how does it work in your practice? I'm not too sure if there is a mixed area or a patchworked quilt area within this protocol. How can you see that working? Obviously you would want someone to be able to breathe and move and change per circumstance, but how would you see that working?
There was one particular area in Portadown which could be deemed that sort of area, we'll call it a mixed area. It was very close to Craigavon Hospital. It's been an issue in the local press for a number of years when flags go up at a certain time of the year. There's a primary school, an integrated primary school, sits within that same area, sitting on a main arterial route to the hospital. Those flags, this particular year, it's not written into our document, but the people involved within the protocol decided that they wouldn't put the flags up till the start of July. So they held back a month. That took them down at the beginning of August. So within that wee pocket, which may be deemed a mixed area. That is neither here nor there for now. They don't have the data and the detail on that. But it's maybe perceived by some as being a mixed area. There was movement from the people within that area who put flags up. Actually take a wee step back. Now, credit to them. Took that decision themselves. No one said you had to do this or you don't have to do it. They made that decision themselves because they felt confident because of the wider group that they sat within, that they were able to do that without seeing it as claimed down or being told to do something. They did it with their own thought process.
I suppose that brings it into the point too then. So if officialdom, no matter who says it, from what branch of officialdom, if they were to come in and say, you shall not or you cannot, how would that affect the protocol itself or the people who are influenced by your protocol? Would they balk at it? Would it make things worse? Would they do the reverse?
Yes. Just a straight answer, yes. Yeah, it would. I think there's something refreshing about empowering a person to make a decision. Then they have ownership of that decision. And that's how it seems to work, on the basis of relationship that's been built. John talked about a couple of years, but realistically, even before Regenerate was formed, our relationships go back in some cases 20 years, and it's the trust there. So there would be a railing against, and even last night as we consulted with the group, just to see, what sentiment do you want us to reflect today, that would have come across very strongly, that any forced legislation it would unravel the good work.
Would you see you get the protocol becoming so detailed that the way that you display flags, not necessarily the timescales and what the flag should be, but the actual, when you drive down the Mall in London, it's so impressive. And I've always thought, well, if our villages and towns were decked out like that in celebration, wouldn't it be so much good culturally, for tourism and everything? You can see how impressive it would look, that the same flag uniformed the whole way down a certain avenue. It would look tremendous. And I've always thought, well, look, that's where we need to be. So even some of the community groups that I deal with, they actually purchase some brackets so that instead of taping up with masking tape a bit of a stick with a flag on it, that they actually have these flag holders on the poles to keep them straight and like mall pipe thing. And to me that looks much more impressive. Now, if you're putting a flag up for the wrong reason, to me it becomes a rag. It's not a flag at all. If a flag is tattered and it's not treated with respect, it's not a flag at all. It becomes a bit of material, fabric at that stage. So that would actually go some way to instructing or teaching, informing young people that there's a respect element here that you have to abide by, both by respecting the community and the people who live around the area, but also by the actual flag and what it represents. No matter what faith or whatever, no matter what nation you belong to, there's a respect for a flag, even if it's not your flag, it's someone else's flag. And that has to be ingrained in everything I do. Is there anything in the protocol could be added to or enhanced to create that, where, look, here's a satisfactory way of displaying a flag, and here's utensils that could be used to actually adorn that better?
That was part of the conversation at the early stages in the drafting of the protocol, that with the flag protocol there also need to be an educational aspect and programme. One of the ideas that would be taken forward is that communities could have perhaps a central flagpole to respectfully fly a flag from, and that could be used as a point of education to young people, because realistically when you talk about parading or flags or bonfires or it's all the same folk, so there's so much crossover. And even in some of the youth work, whether it be diversionary youth work, I could just say that this is a slightly different angle, but the money that OFMDFM provide to the Education Authority in terms of summer intervention and extended intervention is very useful, is very beneficial. And I wasn't sure from the Education Authority whether that was going to continue or whether summer camps through T-Box was going to replace that. But the intervention really, really helps, especially around that time of year, because the young people who are putting up the flags are sometimes involved in groups that are hard to reach or non-engagers, and there are some of the young people that we would have in some of our youth programmes as well. So it all links together. That's just a side point, by the way. However, yes, education has to accompany this, and if somehow we can educate young people to understand what a flag stands for, and that it's not to mark territory, or it's not to be disrespectfully used, or it's to be almost depoliticised and given to the people for ownership, I think, and engender respect and diversity for others as well. Yeah.
Final question, Chip. Northern Ireland's going to the European Championships this year. You would expect everywhere to be clattered with green and white. Portadown gets to the Irish Cup final. You'd expect everywhere to be adorned in red and white. Craigavon, if Glenavon gets, then they're going to be the same. So, can you allow for that expression of fun and celebration at for a period of a month when someone gets their cup final?
Red, white and green.
What's that?
Red, white and green.
Ah, well, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Up the Cliftonville Road, yeah.
It's written into the protocol for unexpected events.
Yes.
That there could be a period of 2 weeks outside. 2 weeks, don't it?
It's 2 weeks.
Outside of the protocol dates, that flags could be put up.
For Ballymena, you'll have to have that on an annual basis.
But they'll be expected to be then taken down within the 2 weeks, Yes. So it would just be to express a sentiment or something or a celebration. Yes. So that's written into the protocol.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for facing and indulging.
Thanks. How would the protocol respond to the display of Irish flags on lamppost, or an Irish flag on a flagpole in the area that you deem it to pertain to?
I think certainly within the protocol, that protocol came out from within the unionist community or the greater unionist community. Some of them may not call themselves unionists, they'll call themselves different terms. But primarily from within the unionist community, that protocol in Portadown grew out of. There are other communities, everyone's aware of that. How the protocol that we have impacts into those other communities remains to be seen. I would hope that they maybe look at themselves from within their own communities. I think it has to start and see how can they do something similar. And I know there was some movement last year regards flags representing another community, which were basically flying at tatters outside places of work and outside areas that a lot of money had spent on to put them into. In political terms, it was being called a shared space, where these flags, the community and the people who put them up felt unable to remove them because they felt they were being manoeuvred into a position that they didn't want to be. They didn't have the confidence to go and pull tatters down from poles, no matter what type of flag they were. So there is a bit of work to be done within other communities, the flying of flags, and we understand that. And Alex has intimated, how can we help with that? The door is open to everyone. We'll repeat that.
So does your protocol pertains to union flags only then?
At this stage, because it's from within our community, it was one of the things that came up a couple of occasions during the public consultation. What they would do if someone in another community does this or does that or the other. And the general consensus on the back of that consultation from within the people who put the flags up was, at this stage, all we're looking at is our own community. That's all we're interested in. If other communities do something different, that's their lookout. And that's, in simple terms, Chris, that's the way it was looked at. So,
what if someone in your areas wants to display an Irish flag?
It happens already. It happens. Certainly within Portadown, there's flags of all colour flown. We'll not call them national identity flags or whatever. There's flags of all colours flown representing all sorts of issues and political themes.
And your focus is union flags?
Certainly within our own community. Yeah.
Okay. I suppose to pick up on that and pick up Paul's comment as well, the OFMDFM Together Building a United Community strategy, which is 3 years old, states that all public space is shared space. So it seems like we're still quite a very far way from that assertion in the OFMDFM strategy being a reality, or the framework from which these issues are approached, in particular areas. Is that a framework that you would support, like to see delivered as a reality? And I say framework, I mean that all public space is shared space.
I think it's certainly an end that it's a government initiative, and we're fully aware of it. Yes, in simple terms, we would be working towards creating shared spaces, however that might look and however long it might take. Shared spaces to different people mean different things, and government needs to help communities as well to get to the point where they want them to go. It's a wee bit more brutal on the ground maybe than it is looking at a bit of paper in black and white sitting in Stormont, and saying this is how we would like it to be. How you get there and what it ends up looking like is two different things. So government maybe needs to have a look at their own documentation and see how they can actually make it work. Fine words, nice. Action and proof on the ground means a lot more.
Well, look, I've tried my best to chair the engagement today as impartially and as chairperson like as possible. I'm conscious as well that this is your first engagement with the Assembly or the Executive, so I wanted to ensure that it was as constructive an engagement and discussion as possible. In my MLA capacity and party capacity, I'm endeavouring to conduct consultation on this issue myself. I think, to try and remain factual, OFMDFM, whilst other processes beyond OFMDFM has process, for example, in the Flags Commission upcoming, did have a responsibility to review a flags protocol that was created in 2005, and bring authority to that flags protocol, which clearly doesn't exist, and that has not been achieved. So in that creates a certain amount of political vacuum around this issue. So I recognise in that context you have attempted to make a contribution to that vacuum, and I think that should be engaged with. Do you see yourselves engaging with the Flags Commission that is scheduled to commence shortly?
I would say yes at this stage. I've said it 2 or 3 times now, the door's open. We're willing to give advice and input, and that's really one of the things that came up with people that are involved in the protocol. They wanted a voice, they wanted to have their voices heard, and they wanted to see that working on the ground. And to a degree it has worked in a local area, but they're very keen, and other people are picking up on that, and they want to move it forward.
And I think that needs to be engaged with. I've alluded earlier to some of the issues, and the significant issues that I think, exist, in relation to this particular issue. I think that this is an informal protocol, and there will be debate as to whether it should be formal or whether it should be, based in law. I think the absence of a lawful mechanism to attribute permission or to authorise the display of flags does create a perception amongst a wider amount of people in the community that it therefore is illegal, that there is a lack of openness and transparency. And I suppose to take you up on the point in terms of the fact that there is no ownership is a benefit. I actually think for many people it is a problem, not knowing who is behind the displays. It does create difficulty for a lot of people, and I think community consent remains an extremely challenging issue to quantify. I see from your brief that there were questionnaires and that attempts have been made around that, but I think getting one objection and how we create an opportunity for the voice of other residents and other members of the public to be heard remains a challenge that I don't think has been overcome by the protocol. And in terms of the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey, where it consistently, has a weighted majority, against the display of flags on lampposts, that one objection, we can debate why it doesn't correlate, but it definitely doesn't correlate with that. So I do think there are, ongoing issues to try and overcome there, but I certainly welcome the work that you've done and the engagement that you're endeavouring to facilitate in relation to that. And maybe outside of this assembly and my position as chairperson today, it'd be possible for me to engage with you further on those issues.
Certainly.
But certainly on behalf of the committee, thank you for the presentation and the time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members. Our next briefing then is from Queen's University Belfast Institute of Irish Studies in relation to research conducted entitled Flags Towards a New Understanding. In your packs you will find the document at page 59, and I'm glad to welcome Dr. Paul Nolan and Dr. Dominic Bryan to the committee today to present to us on this research. Very welcome, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your gamesters
Okay.
coming. Your gamesters coming along today to the last post here.
Do you want to make your opening remarks?
Okay, Chair, thanks very much. I'm afraid it's flags again. And could I stress at the outset how pleased we are to be able to come here and present the results of the research that we've done to the policymakers, which is what you are. I mean, we're hoping that what we've done will be of some assistance to OFMDFM in formulating policies in this area. And if I could start, Chair, just by giving a little bit of background to it. We had worked on a study of the Loyalist flag protest, and we published that last year, and it gave an account of what happened following the Belfast City Council decision to limit the flying of the Union flag. And we documented what happened, where it happened, when it happened, why it happened and how it happened, and I think it was seen generally as a fairly fair and dispassionate account of that. After we had completed that, and when I say we, I mean myself, Dominic and some other colleagues at Queen's, but after we'd done it, we talked about the situation that was emerging, which was of continuing conflict over flags, and we thought we should maybe attempt to look at what could be done to improve the situation, because it's relatively easy to write about what happened and why it happened. It's much more difficult to actually formulate policies that will work. What we were very aware of was that this is the problem that nobody can make any progress on. This is the one that was described, if you remember, by Richard Haas as the most intractable of all the problems. It's the one where, when he produced his report, there were no recommendations other than that somebody else should look at it. And when it came to the Stormont House Agreement, the same thing happened. No decision could be made about flags. It was recommended somebody else should look at it. The same happened with the Fresh Start. And so we thought we should attempt this. Now, let me just be clear at the outset, the modesty of our ambition. We weren't talking about solutions, because there is no magic bullet solution to this problem. What we talked about was how we might make progress, what kind of progress might be possible. And we're talking about it in two different contexts. One is the problem that relates to the flying of official flags on district council buildings, and the other is the flying of flags in the public space, or flags and lampposts as it's most generally known. That's the problem we've just been discussing with Regenerate. And Dominic is going to, in a moment, talk about that. I'll just talk briefly, if I may, about the problem in the district council areas. And we wanted to present some options. The bid that we put into our funder, which was the Community Foundation for Northern Ireland, said that we would produce options, and that's what we wanted to do. When you look at this, we wanted to do some blue sky thinking, but there's not lot of blue skies in Northern Ireland. I mean, really, when you get down to it, there is a very limited number of options. This is not like a mathematical puzzle, where if you get enough cerebral power directed on it, you'll crack it. It's not like that. There are only limited options. 18 days, 365 days, 2 flags, no flags, and we had to see, well, what else might you do? We put in a few other options, like the possibility of a neutral flag. We weren't that keen on doing that because we were aware at the time of the Haas talks that, Richard Haas had floated this idea of a civic flag or a neutral flag, and it was absolutely demolished. So didn't seem a lot of point in putting it forward.
No, I don't want to interrupt you too much in your presentation. As someone on that process, the consultation responses, I was quite surprised by how many of the consultation responses raised the issue of a Northern Irish flag.
Yep.
Is that what you're talking about?
Well, Chair, you're taking the words out of my mouth, because when we commissioned Lucid Talk, the polling agency that does the work for the Belfast Telegraph, and we had an arrangement with the Belfast Telegraph that they would publish our findings and we'd get further feedback. That's how it all happened. And we hadn't included it because we didn't want to put non-feasible options in there. But actually what happened was, what our researchers were telling us, that when they were doing the telephone interviews, people kept raising this. So we put it in, the possibility of another flag, and we suggested it could be, for example, it could be the Red Hand or whatever. So we got responses on that. We also look at the fact that when you talk about a compromise solution, well, originally 18 days was a compromise. But what has happened since then is that because it had come to be seen as the non-unionist or the anti-unionist position, it would no longer be seen as a compromise. So we also tested for a compromise between 18 and 365 days. So the results of all of that polling are included in the report. I'm not going to go into them now, it's too detailed. I'll get cut straight to the chase on this. On the issue of district council flags, the option that emerged as the one most favoured was for the Union flag to be flown 18 days a year in Belfast and in all other council areas across Northern Ireland. Now, the immediate response to that will be that that won't fly. Unionists will not accept the Union flag being restricted to 18 days, and nationalists, particularly west of the band, will not countenance the Union flag flying at all. Nonetheless, we are putting it forward as a recommendation, the reason being that when you look at this problem, there is this other option, of course, which is the do-nothing option. Here's the problem with the do-nothing option. If you do nothing, it doesn't mean that nothing will happen. What it means is we're going to be living with this problem next year, the year after. Our kids are going to be living with this. We'll be hearing about flags for the rest of our lives. And we felt there's a responsibility here to try to take this on and do something. And what we feel, and why we wanted to put that forward as the option for consideration, is that things change depending on the circumstance and depending how it's put forward. I mean, for example, there have been times, despite popular belief, there have been times when flags issues have been resolved. For example, in 1988, the fair employment legislation required that all flags and insignia be removed from workplaces, and they were. And now, no one would dream of going back to the situation we used to have. No one, even during the flag protest, no one suggested the Union flag should be put up again or bunting put up again in factory floors the way it used to be. Because when the legislation changes, it's like the seatbelt thing, when the legislation changes, people's attitudes change. Another example, in the year 2000, Peter Mandelson made an intervention and he got legislation passed, the flags legislation of 2000, which said the Union flag will fly on government buildings on the following days, and he listed the designated days. And there was a High Court case taken by Sinn Féin against it. The judicial review decided that what he had done was in keeping with the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. And do you know what? Nobody worries about that anymore. People do move on. But they do move on in situations where you get, the smack of firm government. So our feeling is that If the political parties wanted a resolution to this, that's the way it would get resolved. That would be the best option, the one that was most likely found favour. And what we discovered through the polling is there are a large number of people, a large section of the population who actually don't care that much what the detail of the resolution is, just so long as we stop hearing about this, that it gets resolved. So that's the recommendation that we're putting forward on the first issue about official flags on government buildings, or rather on district council buildings. And Chair, at this point I'll ask Dominic to continue on flags, on lampposts, unless you want to take questions on this first. Do you want to come in on this, on the district council bit first?
Sorry, would someone mind taking the chair for me for a second, just for a quick comfort break, and then I'll come back in and you can take questions on this while I'm away then? Should someone step in?
Yeah.
Anybody mind?
Wait.
Paul, you happy enough? Back shortly. You can take your question first.
Okay, that will do.
Chair,
I'm sure I won't list anyway, but I'll step in just briefly. But I suppose my questions to start with would be: Do we think that flags is the problem, or is flags just a symptom or a front of a wider problem?
I'll answer this if I may, Dominic. The answer is very definitely the latter. I mean, the flags are a symptom of a deeper malaise. I mean, that's what we know. And they relate to bonfires, and they relate to all those other things that the new Commission's got to look at, history and identity. They relate to all of those. So they are a symptom of something deeper. But if you go to your doctor and you've got some problem that's presenting, there may be some deeper cause to it. But your doctor's going to say, but let's get rid of the symptoms first. Let's treat those. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to look at the problem as it presents to say, well, what can be done, rather than wait until all the other problems are resolved, because that would be a long time coming.
The fear on this, and why I was keen to take your part of the presentation first, is because that seems to have, that democratic position or decision caused the biggest ripple on the street, as opposed to the displaying on lampposts type thing, and most particularly the Belfast City Hall decision. But whilst I can understand why, when somebody looks at this from upon high or whatever, and they say, right, let's find options or solutions, you can see, well, you're always going to come to a compromise. You're never ever going to pick one side over another.
That's right.
So it's a bit like a piece of cheese. If you walk down the street with a piece of cheese and somebody says, that's my cheese, you give them half of it. You share. You walk down the next day with the smaller bit of cheese, and the man comes in and says, that's my cheese. And before you realise it, you have no cheese. Nobody has any cheese left. So compromising itself, I like my cheese, but compromising itself isn't necessarily a solution. Because somewhere along the line, someone will have to give way. And in 10 years' time, if you don't resolve the kernel of the problem, that will raise its head again, and you will have the same problem where someone else, probably the same person, has to compromise further.
Well, I take your point, not entirely about the cheese, incidentally, but on the wider issue, I do take your point. But you have to look at the interrelationship. We went out and spoke to a lot of people before we sort of put pen to paper in this. And we spoke to Regenerate, for example, and a lot of other loyalist groups. And one thing that's very clear, when you ask people in loyalist areas, why do you want all these flags up? What's the point of them? All the groups we spoke to said the same thing. It all relates back to that decision that was made in Belfast City Hall. And so conversely, if you want to solve the problem of flags in the community, one place to start is actually getting it right in the district councils. If you get it right there, it begins to ease the problem elsewhere. If you get the flags thing right, you'll start to get the bonfire thing right, and so on and so forth. There are so many layers to this problem. But if you come to Northern Ireland and you drive off from City Airport down the Sydenham Road or you come in off the ferry, no matter what way you come in, the first thing that will strike you is this place is not normal. There is a problem here because nowhere else in the world do we get this. And so this is the problem that presents itself to the outside world. It's very much a problem, or particularly in Protestant working class areas. And yes, there are many other problems that perhaps we should have been solving, but this is the one that we've attempted to address here. And we fully accept its interrelationship with other issues.
When the Belfast City Hall decision was taken, there was protests in Ballymena, my constituency of Northampton. And when I went to speak, now I wouldn't attend any of the street protests, but I did attend every organised meeting in a hall or in a public space, a public building, or any meetings, because I felt that I could do more good there, and also secondly, it's hard to control street when people are angry, frustrated and volatile. But I asked the question, why are you protesting? And actually in some cases young people were rioting in Ballykeel, burning pensioners' bins, the whole heap, actually destroying their own community. But I asked them why were they doing it in Ballymena when Ballymena flies 4 flags all year round. And they couldn't, first of all, they couldn't answer me, but second of all, they didn't even realise that where they were standing protesting, some of them hadn't even realised to look up, they would see the flag. And only when I left council one night and I asked one of them, why, and he says, because the flags are being taken down. And I says, look up above. And he was taken aback that the flag was there. So there was misinformation. And there was people out there who wanted to manipulate a certain situation for their own gains. So no matter what the issue would be or the symptom, those same sinister shadows could well exploit other weaknesses and other areas of conflict, not necessarily conflict, but difference. How do you? So even if one of your options is everybody go to a uniform 18 days. How can anyone ensure that flags won't become an issue in 2 years' time?
Well, you can't. But what you also know is this, that if the politicians in Northern Ireland were able to agree on this, it would set a tremendous example. If that partnership could be demonstrated, if mutual respect were shown and compromises were struck, it sets a tone and attitude, it sets the mood music for what will follow. And if we continue to have contention, as we're having at the moment, for example, in Causeway Coast and Glens Council, which is just the first one up, because this debate's going to be rerun in all other councils where you've got sort of rivalrous claims, and it's going to be rerun with the same effect that we had in Belfast. And here is the problem. I mean, the problem with the councils, and it's really a problem for Northern Ireland, is you can decide these issues democratically. That is by a vote. Once you've created that situation, you then get intense minorities, and you'll get them on both sides. What is being discovered in some unionist-dominated councils is, what happened in Belfast, we can now do the other way around, but with the same result. You will get intense minorities on the other side. And I honestly do not want to live through all of this again, year after year, council by council. I would like to see the politicians resolve it. So what we've done, and we hope it's helpful, is we've taken opinion amongst the population in Northern Ireland, and what we're presenting to you is the evidence of the polls, which, incidentally, is not really any different than the same evidence as is presented by Northern Ireland Life and Times, and more recently by Professor John Gary. The differences are we got 53%, Life and Times got 51%, John Gary got 54%, but we are all affirming the same thing. This is what people in Northern Ireland want.
Is it appropriate, whilst I can understand there could well be a flag up above a building that would be City Hall or Town Hall, is it not more appropriate to have a flag 365 days a year in, let's say, a memorial garden, where within that there would be a cenotaph?
Quite possibly, but it's our discussions with members of the unionist community and our reading of all the representations that were made during the original flag dispute show one thing very clearly, that for the unionist population, the key issue is sovereignty. And that means the official flag on a public building should be the Union flag. That is affirmed to unionists through the Belfast Agreement. The problem is, for nationalists, what is very clear in their reading of that agreement is that it's to do with parity of esteem. So if there's going to be a Union flag, there should be an Irish flag. And that seems very obvious to people from a nationalist perspective.
Yeah.
The problem is trying to make those two things match up.
But why are they incompatible? Because I'm as Irish as anyone in this room. I belong to the Presbyterian Church of Ireland. I was served in the Royal Irish Rangers. I live on the island of Ireland. My ancestors would have been Irish when the island was won. I'm as Irish as anybody in this room, but yet my flag is the Union flag, and my constitution, my country, is the United Kingdom. So should there not be an acceptance that of the constitutional position? And then, why would that ever affect your Irishness?
Well, what we tried to do was get the coordinates in this to see, well, where is the point where most people could find agreement, because we want to accommodate that perspective, but we also have to listen to the perspective of people who feel their cultural identity is not getting expression through the flying of the Union flag. And when we looked at the possibilities and what would make most people happy, or if not happy, at least what people could live with, this is what they tell us. I mean, we were not, I should emphasise this strongly, we were here to try and map the field and find out what could we present to the policymakers as evidence. And this is evidence of where people in Northern Ireland are at the present time. I have to tell you, a really sizable section of the population don't care which flag it is. They just want you to get agreement and do it. Find a compromise, whatever that compromise might be. And so we're suggesting, and I don't want to oversell this, because, you know, 53, 51, 54, not a huge majority. It's significantly bigger than the number, the percentage for the next best option, where you go down to 30%. You know, I mean, it's still the one that would command most support. Would it be popular with nationalists west of the band? No. Would it be popular with unionists who want to see the Union flag 365 days a year? No. But it's equal pain, and my understanding of the way in which we've managed to make progress through this peace process is every so often we have to accept compromises where you balance out the pain for the two communities, and it may be that some of this has to be done in some, again, seems to be how this peace process works, through some larger package which might have some other counters on the table to do with Maes Long Kesh, the Irish Language Act or whatever. But my guess is that if you were to go forward in time and be told whatever happened to that flag dispute in Northern Ireland, looking back from the perspective of 100 years hence, you would find it got resolved. How did it get resolved? By a compromise. What was the compromise? It's one of these.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. In terms of the recommendation, Dr. Nolan, so the recommendation is a regional policy of designate the Union flag on designated days at District Council headquarters. Can you say a little bit more about the grounds on which you make that recommendation?
Well, it's simply, this is based on the opinion that we got from the people of Northern Ireland, Chair. I mean, this is what we put out. We put out a number of options, and this is what we tested. And we've checked this. I mean, it's very consistent with all the other research data. So what we're not going to claim is originality. I mean, we're not the first people to suggest this. And it has been tested through other polls. But we felt we had to run them again and try the alternatives, like the compromise, say, between 18 and 365 days. And what you find with that is, yeah, a lot of people go for that until you say, well, what number would it be then between 18 and 365? And you can guess where that goes. Whatever number you suggest, it's the wrong number. And if you say it should be one additional day a week or a month or whatever, people dispute that. If you say it should be a neutral flag, it just doesn't really, none of them command the same support. So that's the evidence.
For avoidance of doubt, it's a recommendation that my party put to an environment bill prior to local government reform in order to try and have a consistent policy rather than a cantonised debate around Northern Ireland, and it was voted against at that stage. But your work is fresh for consideration. Can I bring in Alec Maskey?
Thank you, Chair. If I understood you right, Paul, you were saying the option you would be putting forward, and you didn't want to oversell it, would be that all district council officers or the headquarters would fly a union flag for so many days a year. See, what I really fail to understand is that there's two guys behind you who came here and gave a presentation just before yourselves, and probably like myself don't have a big long list of formal education, but they're very pragmatic, very sensitive to realities. And here you bring forward an option which you know is going to fall for its base, which completely misunderstands the direction of the Good Friday Agreement, where communities are at this point in time. So I actually fail to see how you could actually put that option on the table with the face, to be honest with you.
Well, I'm sorry you see it that way.
I think, Paul, because I mean, it just absolutely fails to recognise that there are, whether some people like it or not, there are two major communities here. And we do have to pragmatically deal with things, and I would dearly love to have a situation where you wake up someday, and I've been involved in this process from the outset. I do know that there's been a lot of sacred cows slain. I've been one of the people from within my own party who have gone around saying to people, we had this as a golden cow, but we sold it out, we brokered it. You say 6 months later, what was all that about? I understand all that and lived through all of that, but this is an issue which is, and I actually believe that the flag is purely symbolic. I understand the importance of people attached to it. I have an importance of my own national flag. I understand what it means to everybody to have their, what they see as their flag, and to give the respect and reverence to that. But for me, I see it really as symbolic to a wider set of circumstances. I mean, I spoke to people in my own organisation around policing, for example, and at one discussion I remember people were talking about badges and the flags and all sorts of. I remember saying, what the hell are we thinking about here? You know, you're talking about symbols. What about the substance of representation, accountability, delivery of a civic police service, all the rest of the, what I would consider to be what a police service should be, not the colour of a flag or a badge on somebody's cap. They're very important. One thing I have learned over the last number of years, because I put an Irish flag alongside a Union flag in my own office in City Hall and the Mayor's office, because I wasn't going to take one flag down, but I wanted to make sure others got respect for what they would see as their flag. But how on earth could you think that it'd be reasonable or credible to be suggesting to a lot of those other district councils, by the way, you have nothing on there at the moment, but you're going to have a flag on for so many days during the year? Like, I really fail to see how you could actually come to that conclusion.
Okay. Well, let's just go back for a moment to the issue of the symbol on the PSNI cap and the PSNI flag, because there is a PSNI flag. The reason why the PSNI now deal with the substantive issues and why the policing board engages at every meeting with what you might want to call the real issues is because they managed to get past the issue of the symbol.
Do you seriously see some of those district councils agreeing tomorrow morning to put a flag on?
Well, hold on. I mean, the point I want to make is that if they hadn't managed to find the resolution on the symbolic issue, that debate would be continuing and you wouldn't be discussing the real issue. So you've got to solve the issue of cultural contestation. You've got to deal with it. You can't say that's not real. We want to deal with bread and butter. This is real to people. This is real for the reasons that you suggest. Symbols matter to people. Please bear in mind that when we present this to you, we are not coming here and saying we're two chaps who've got an idea. That's not what we're doing. What we're reporting to you, and please don't shoot the messenger, is we have put this out to polling So when we say this is what people want, these aren't imaginary
the polling
people.
is manifest. The real polling manifests itself in the number of representatives representing the various communities in those council areas.
Yep.
And I'm going back to the same point, Paul. I know all the arguments we've discussed it. I know. I knock doors. I've talked to middle class people who would tell you outside the door that don't be interested in flags. But let me tell you, they do be.
They are interested.
I've seen people on the Malone Road who be very quick to tell you about the kind of flag that they want or don't want, but they're not go out the door and say it publicly, as you well know.
I fully accept that. I mean, and that's why we wanted to try and address the problem, because we're aware this is a real problem. It has to be tackled. The only way, and I will repeat this, the only way it will be resolved is through compromise. And what we're trying to do is find, well, where is that area of compromise? Where might it be possible? I know it seems to defy the laws of political gravity to suggest what we are suggesting, but we know that all the other problems that you and your party and the other politicians and their parties have resolved, they've resolved by agreeing to take an equal share of pain. It's the only way that this problem will ever be resolved. But we are reporting to you, this is what the people that we've spoken to or polled have said to us, and that is broken down, incidentally, and you'll find it in the report, by council area. And we have a lot of other data which we haven't published because you can only put so much into one report, but we've actually got the opinion from west of the Ban, and I went out and did focus groups with people west of the Ban. We tried all of this, we said difficult things, we had the difficult conversations. The recommendation we're putting forward, it's a difficult recommendation. What's the alternative?
Okay. Just briefly, Paul. I think I appreciate your response there. Alec, I didn't want to intervene too much in relation to that question. You were using fairly robust language there in terms of straight faces and credibility and all the rest of it. I mean, we're dealing with. If you let me finish, all right. We're dealing with evidence-based recommendations here that Dr. Nolan has put forward. I think it's important that we try to just watch the language to a certain extent. And
well, look, I can assure you there's absolutely no offence taken here.
So I know, and that's why I didn't intervene at the time, because clearly it wasn't. Clearly you're more than capable of responding to it. Yeah. And unfortunately, in my position of chair and the nature of the committee, this isn't really a debate, so we can't really engage in debate either. But there are interesting issues being raised that maybe we can take up at another time.
No, the only other point I want to make is the bit that I've been talking about, flags and district councils. That's the easy bit. Dominic's going to talk.
Just before Dominic,
I'll bring you in 1 second, Paul. The one I will use chair then slightly. It's her last day. Alec, you'll forgive me. But I suppose the one point I would put back respectfully is you say, how can it be suggested that a regional policy can be considered with a straight face, and you say it's not credible to ask other councils to consider a change in policy. You asked Belfast, the people of Belfast, to consider a significant change in policy, and indeed, as did my party, and we have put forward a regional policy on a number of occasions. So I think there is a need for reflection amongst people who have put forward change in particular areas to have the courage to deliver that type of change in other areas as well.
I mean, respect your guidance as a chair, and I certainly wouldn't want to be insulting Paul or Dominic for that matter, and they know me long enough that I'll be straight talking, but I certainly wouldn't want to be offending anybody. We should be doing this maturely. We're not going to have a big long debate about this because we've been spending the last number of years at it, and I'm certainly not going to look forward to Easter, never mind Christmas, talking about flags again. We did compromise in Belfast as a party, as you well know, in terms of flags, because we thought it was a very reasonable thing to do, given the nature of the city in Belfast, the population, demographics, and all of that. And as an attempt at kind of reconciliation and getting an accommodation, because that's what we have been trying to do throughout this whole entire process. You keep trying to move forward inch by inch. Even sometimes you take 2 steps back to give 1 step forward. I know all that, understand all that. That's been bread and butter. I also do my own polling. I know people. I've been around a long time. I'm on a lot of doorsteps. I talk to people from every hue, every walk of life, every sector of society, and people have very clear opinions, whatever the Belfast Telegraph might tell you. And those are realities, and you can count up the bean counters, we can count up how many people say they, B or C in a poll. All I was drawing attention to was what I thought was a graphic difference of handling something from the same evidence base, and that's why I referred to John and Keith early on. There's two people from an area taking an issue over the last lot of years, coming to it very practically, very pragmatically, very sensitively. But yet of all, yourselves will come and put an option on the table, which you know is not going to be a runner. Which you know is completely counter to where this whole process has been going in the last lot of years.
Well, what other options should
Well, I
we
mean,
put?
well,
I want to move us on.
Okay.
It doesn't seem to be counter to what over 50% of Northern Ireland think. But let's move on. Let's get some other questions in here. Paul, do you want to make a comment and then bring Gordon in?
Just
or-
one wee quick question, and that is the simple solution here is to not make the flag political. It should be constitutional. So when I'm out in the doors, I don't ever get the flag issue. I get education, I get jobs, I get money in people's pockets. But when something has been removed, that's when it becomes pain. And when it's been removed, that's when it's been dragged down to political. Whereas it should be constitutional. It should be above politics. Is that something that you see reflected in your evidence?
Well, I think the constitutional status of Northern Ireland is the political issue. You can't have a more political issue.
It's resolved.
than that. It's resolved through the Good Friday Agreement, and the demonstration of sovereignty is what is key to unionism. We understand that. We also understand to nationalists there is a need for parity of esteem, that one culture should not be esteemed over the other. And this is the problem we were trying to look at. How do you manage to get an arrangement that both sides can accept? It's not easy.
I could add that we are getting into some of the very difficult questions here, and the committee is not always the status is not always the best way to do that. But how do it anyway? It's the last day. How do you how do you apply parity of esteem to a constitutional status?
Well, the two are separate principles, and the manifestation of them also has to be treated as a separate issue. I mean, what we were looking at was specifically flags, but it is part of a broader context where one would hope that in any government building or district council building, for that matter, that anyone from the city or the area will feel that their community is respected, their history and tradition is reflected in the insignia, the memorial, all of that, all of the symbolic manifestations within the building. And it's going to take a long time to work through that. I mean, it's somewhat ironic, but perhaps the most successful example of that, I would suggest anywhere really in a post-conflict society, was in Belfast, up to the 3rd of December. It had been a remarkable journey that had gone through a whole series of iterations, including the period when Alex Maskey was Lord Mayor and had two flags in the Lord Mayor's parlour. Before that, Alban McGuinness, and so on and so forth. And there were very civilised debates in Belfast City Council, and very great leadership shown by the council officials as well, to get to a position where not just the memorabilia, the flags and the insignia, but St Patrick's Day, all of those things were really, really a case study on how to manage issues of cultural contestation. And then December the 3rd, 2012, it all went wrong. But up to that, it had been a successful attempt. I think that shouldn't be forgotten.
What exactly went wrong is the debate, which will not lead us down. Gordon, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks very much for coming. I appreciate you taking the time to come and to take so many questions in regards to this, and for answering them as well. And you know, my own view is that robust language is good. I think that we do need to be straight with each other. I don't think that anybody's been disrespectful in any way here today. And I think it is important that we talk about these issues and that we're very open in regards to them, because it's an exceptionally difficult issue to deal with. I would like to go to page 22 in your report, and then compare that with page 23, because I think there's a discrepancy here. Because what we have on page 22 is obviously no majority for any preference at all, be it the 18 days compromise between 18 and 365, or never the union flag flown. There's no majority there. Yep. Then we go to the next page, and another question is asked, which is, do you want the 18-day policy to be spread across all 11 district councils? And I'd just like a wee bit more information on that, because I think that it'd be interesting to get the geographical and community background breakdown of each of those, because I think that a unionist in Fermanagh, their initial preference would be for 365, but when it comes down to the second question, they would probably say, "Do I want it extended?" Yes, I do.
You're actually spot on with this. I mean, if we were able to show you all the data, what you'd see is that when people answer opinion polls, they do it in the same way as they vote. They do it tactically. So there's particular areas where you might expect unionists to go for 365, but they're going for 18 designated days, because they think that where they're at, that's the best deal they can cut. And the reverse is also true. You know, nationalists who might otherwise go for one option go for another. So what we were asking was two questions, and this explains, I hope, the discrepancy. That you were asking people, what's your preference, you know, for yourself in your area? But then when you ask them about what do you think could be applied across the whole of Northern Ireland, and so we wanted to see, because this is one of the things that came out, that people actually didn't want what the chairs referred to as the cantonisation, i.e. lots of different mini states, each with their own regulations. They wanted one approach that was standard across the councils. So when you say, okay, that's your preference in this area, but if it's going to work across the whole of Northern Ireland, that's when you go from the 39.8 up to the 53%. And that, again, is pretty consistent with the data collection from elsewhere. And so, you know, what we're saying is there's a weight of evidence now for this. I mean, I don't want to overemphasise the importance of our report in this, because I think all we're doing, in a way, is affirming or reaffirming what's been found elsewhere, but we're putting it forward in a particular context as a kind of basket of proposals, if you like, concerning flags generally. And I really would like if we could move on to the flags on lampposts, because Dominic has a lot of things to say.
Looking forward to hearing from. Do you want to brief supplement?
If I can, I will try and be brief. Understand you want to move on, but do you understand how this creates a bit of a problem then for decision makers? Because it's very clear that there's no clear majority view there in terms of a decision, and as policy makers and as decision makers, we don't just vote perhaps just as tactically on these things when it comes to region. And I think that's why and you know, Alex has made the point in terms of the recommendation that's coming forward, and I think that's why it's not a starter, because although, you know, we've analysed the difference between the two of those there, we see how there can be problems that come from that, and that's why it's going to be so difficult for policymakers to make.
It's a starter for Alex when it's been reduced.
I agree with you. I'll tell you what, people are willing to compromise.
This is a problem we had to wrestle with. That, you know, if we had found that there was a particular option, let's call it option X, and it commanded 95% of the population's support, well, no problem. We wouldn't want to oversell this in the sense of it's given limited comfort to the politicians, but this isn't a big majority in favour of this. But we do add this, and I think this really does have to be emphasised. Once you, if the main political parties endorsed a proposal, almost doesn't matter what that proposal is, the fact of agreement accelerates its acceptability with the population. So in other words, that's how it stands at the moment. If that carried the endorsement of DUP, Sinn Féin Alliance, SDLP, etc., there would just be no problem at all. I mean, if people felt that this was going to put an end to a debate that most people find tedious, I mean, this is what we find researching it. Most people find the issue just really, really tedious. So if the political parties were to get behind this, and then you were to test opinion, you would find that the number of people in favour of it would shoot away.
Yeah.
Last question before we move on to Dominic. Very brief. How do you plan to engage with the Flags Commission in relation to that recommendation?
Well, we know very little about the Flags Commission, Chair. We know it's to be set up. We were told it would be set up and operational in March. Do let us know. We will.
You may know before.
We will. We'll be very. You know, we've done a lot of research, much more than we're able to put in this report, and we'd be more than willing to share it.
Okay. Dominic.
Right.
Floor's yours.
I'll be as quick because I know we've got quite a long afternoon. I think it's interesting that we sometimes wrestle with how important the symbols are, and however much at times we want to say, you know, they are not the most important issues, they're just a symptom, they come back to haunt us all the time. But they do have economic impact when they're used in public spaces. They're a very costly irritant for government agencies. It's named by people as problem time and time again when councils do polls. And without some sort of solution, the present policy, Together Building a United Community, is not going to be successful. So, I mean, in that sense, flags are like walls, right? They serve the same purpose. And let me try and capture the problem. Let me describe the putting up of flags. On the one hand, display of flags are an expression of identity, protected by human rights, a practice common across the world, and a legitimate, long-standing expression of political and cultural life in Ulster. On the other hand, it's a practice of demarcating territory by groups of men, sometimes with actual or assumed paramilitary connections, that has significant impact on people's behaviour, detrimentally influencing local economies, undermining the rule of law, and carrying a level of threat so significant that agencies are not willing to intervene. Now, the problem is both of those things are true at the same time. That's what makes it such an intractable issue. We know that large numbers of flags left up on main roads for a long length of time become tatty and dirty. We know that people find this very disrespectful. The flags are often flown in areas unconnected to community activities. That's one of the difficulties. We're not just talking about flags in community. They're often unconnected to community activities in areas of contest and around public services. Life and Time Serve in 2014 found 19% of people intimidated by loyalist flags and murals and 10% by Republican flags and murals. In 2013, when the Life and Times survey asked people who put union flags up, 56% of them said paramilitaries. Who put tricolours up? 59% said paramilitaries. Our national flags are intimately linked to paramilitaries, all right, in the public mind. 63% of people find flags on lampposts annoying or very annoying. 19% are supportive or very supportive. All right. Support differs according to class and community background, but even in working class Protestant areas, those describing themselves as fully supportive amount to about 25%. However, as Paul says, those intense minorities are important people that we need to be aware of. So just because I'm saying that it's a minority practice doesn't mean that we don't need to be very fully aware of their feelings and their rights when we're trying to solve the problem. And in conclusion, our polling showed that 7 out of 10 people would like to see some sort of more regulation on flags, which is quite a substantial number. So what are the sort of answers that you can get? What are the policy options? Well, one is a do-nothing option, which is what we've effectively been doing for the last 10 years. Even though we had a policy, we know it wasn't really enacted by any of the agencies. Its strength is it doesn't require us to do anything different from what we're doing. The weakness is it won't solve any of the problems or ease any of the issues that we've been under. So the two other options, I suppose, are the bottom-up option and the top-down option. And I'll come to the bottom-up, but we've already had a very good example of that from Regenerate. The top-down options are legislative, to use existing legislation, and that has to the advantage that it's already in place, and there are ways that they could be used differently. Its weaknesses of that, of course, are that the legislation has existed for a long time and does not seem to make any difference. When we talk to agencies, they seem very wary of enacting anything, so the agencies don't really want to do it. And the problem is that this leads to widespread flouting of existing law, which even when we spoke to the PSNI, they point out that this undermines the respect for the rule of law. So we've got an option of introducing new legislation. This is in line with what a lot of people would like. It would bring clarity to an area where currently the legislation is, shall we say, foggy. It would remove illegality from practices that are currently technically illegal. It would allow for action potentially against paramilitary flags, and it would allow for action against flags outside agreed time periods. The weakness, however, the problems are, it's very difficult to draft ways in which you can secure the objectives you want. It would be seen, not necessarily unreasonably, as an attack upon freedom of expression. It would also be seen as an attack particularly on unionist culture. It would probably in the short term result on more flags being put up and greater street protest, at least in the short term, and not necessarily in the long term, but in the short term. Difficult to police consistently, difficult to secure cross-community support. So on the other side, we look at the options we have from below. There are existing protocols that have provided discipline in some areas. They take the burden away from the PSNI to a certain extent. However, in some areas, they have also provided clear legitimacy for paramilitaries that underwrite them, and a number of council officials will tell you how that takes place. They are patchy and inconsistent and break down very easily. I've watched them over many years. I think I've done 15 years now, 12, 13 years of following these, and you're told to get about a protocol and then 2 years later it's gone. There's been a change in leadership. There's been an incident happen and it disappeared. And it tends to undercut the rule of law and the authority of the police and public bodies. The next option, and there are definitely, as we've heard, there are good voluntary options which work and can work, but whether they could change things across Northern Ireland is doubtful as a whole. So the second option, of course, is to have a Northern Ireland-wide protocol. Polls show that there's large-scale support for some sort of a solution like that. You could get possible buy-in from political leadership and therefore legitimacy, so it would involve some leadership from the top. And that may well be able to create space for local protocols. It's resource light, to be frank. It wouldn't cost a great deal of money. And again, it removes the burden from the police and the public authorities. However, it's not clear, it does not clear up the legal problems that presently exist. Without any forms of penalties, it could well be ignored. And the fragmentary nature of loyalism tends to make it difficult for some of these sort of things to stick. So none of the options are easy. What we've suggested and we think is important is a set of guidelines. We've come up with our own one called Liberty and Respect, to attempt to provide a guidelines overall. And in this report, rather than at this moment go for legislation, although we don't, if this problem can't be moved on, I can foresee legislation at some point. But in this report, we've gone for trying to do a voluntary sort of approach, you know, based on some of the ideas that we've heard from Regenerate in the short term. But that would need quite a lot of political pressure from the top, a more joined-up approach than we're getting at the moment, and for people within their communities to take responsibility for their communities rather than, as often happens, pointing out what's happening in other communities, and that isn't something, and that is something that, particularly in the year that coming, we think would be important. So we put forward the suggestion of these guidelines. We're fully aware that all of the options, as I've outlined, have their problems, and we do fear that unless we can grapple with this problem on a Northern Ireland basis in the next few years, then we will end up back in this same place, and we will end up talking about legislation at some point.
Thank you, Dominic. I always find the work that yourself and Dr. Rowland have done on this issue to be extremely helpful. It is, as we've seen today, a very difficult issue to try and start identifying ways to respond, and I find the work that you've done extremely valuable. There has been comments today that that people are at least increasingly frustrated that this is not an issue that we've been able to improve on. You cite economic impacts. You also say that one of the reasons for agencies not responding to the issue is a threat so significant that agencies won't intervene to establish the rule of law. How much of a problem is it in 2016 in Northern Ireland that we have an issue with a threat so significant that agencies won't intervene to establish the rule of law?
I think it underlines the ongoing problems we have, which is coming out of a peace process, with engagement with paramilitary groups, and with the nature of what's taking place in working class areas. It's not unusual in cities across the world, I have to say. It's to do with, to a certain extent, the economic situations that people live in, but it does underline the difficulties that we still have. That council workers, even police officers, are unwilling to intervene in situations where things are clearly in violation of the law. And yet they feel too threatened to do so, or that by intervening, the public disorder that would result would be of such a significant level that that it's, in a sense, not wise to do so. And yes, it's at the core, and again, as has been said today on a number of occasions, this is about a network of issues. I mean, it isn't a simple thing. It is a complex network of issues. And potentially one of the advantages with this new commission, which has a broader remit than just flags, might be that it can link a number of these issues together. But yes, I mean, it does say something about our society, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. I think the Executive and the Assembly need to seriously reflect on a situation where threat is preventing the operation of the rule of law. I've said that before, it's not going to be a surprise. In terms of the liberty and respect guidelines, can you say a bit more about some of the key elements of those recommended guidelines?
It was an attempt by us to look at some of the protocols and guidelines that others have got. Of course, we've been talking to the people of Regenerate, and come to a very a simple and broad a set of ideas as we possibly could around time, place and communication. We were keen that, firstly, that it was clear that people have the right to express their identity. And I always think it's important to point out that although these issues have a high profile here, people here are not any different from anywhere else in the world. And people want to express their identity, and that's as it is and as it should be, and that right should be defended. However, we do have a context in Northern Ireland of contestation, political contestation, which creates political difficulties. So that fundamentally we're asking, the fundamental idea behind it is that whilst people have the right to express their identity, that they should do so with respect. and that people should, in the first place, do their best to respect their own symbols, because one of the striking things is the disrespect with which people are treating the symbols which they claim are important to them. And we think at the very least it would make a difference if the general message went out from organisations which can have effect and impact, and government would say, let's look after our own symbols and let's treat them with respect, because that will give a message about how important we feel to them. And I think the public environment that we live in would be vastly improved if just that alone was done. Now, when we talk to you cannot find anybody who basically disagrees with that idea in any community, anywhere. The difficulty is, despite the fact that you can get agreement from everybody, I could do another count of flags in October this year and I'd have found thousands of flags still up there in tatty. So somehow we've got to get that at least that value and that idea more ingrained in our society, either through leadership or through projects that attempt to do that.
Okay, do you have any specific suggestions in terms of the guidelines? I see in terms of time, it makes suggestions around time periods.
Yeah.
2 weeks around key dates, except in exceptional circumstances. In terms of place, suggests recognised civic spaces such as town squares and centre of cities. And then it also says that residents of areas where flags are displayed can reasonably expect to know who is putting the flags up and how long they will be displayed.
Yes, I mean, I do believe fundamentally it's reasonable that people know who are putting the flags up. An idea of having transparency around that, I think, is quite important. And some of the protocols, again, Regenerate described how people can get in touch with them about the issues with the flags, and I think that's very helpful. Some of the protocols I've known about have been, how would I put it, sort of fairly cosy deals between certain community leaders and councils, which I do not think is helpful. I think if you're going to express something like that, it is important that people know who and have someone to go to deal with the problem. As for the time bounded, I think I'm personally not convinced by the, if you like, the large marching season argument. I think that's a relatively new invention, the June, July, August thing. I don't think there's any long history in Northern Ireland of that. And I'm more minded that people should be able to do it in very explicit times around important events. One of the things I've noticed is the more you spread your symbols around, the less sacred they become, the less important they become. All right? And if the 1st of July and the 12th of July are the key dates for you, then make those dates important. Make a difference on those weeks. If you spread it out, and I have to say, when the Queen's Golden Jubilee came along, most of those loyalist areas didn't look very much different from they normally look because the flags were already up. And in a way, you debase the symbol by using it too much. So in part of the respect idea is less is more in this. Make those occasions special. So that's why I'm in favour of a smaller time period than most people suggest, but I do think there are good reasons for it.
Okay. I thought the Golden Jubilee was actually a good example on many occasions. I attended quite a few street parties where bunting was used, for example, of a weekend, up on Friday, down on Monday. I thought that was a window into what time-bound, appropriate, respectful display.
One of the key things that has changed, which I think is important, is the flags have become cheaper. That they're produced and they're a very cheap material. They actually only work on one side. Because of that, whereas in the past, if you owned a flag, you took it down because you had to use it next year. Now, if you even leave it up for 2 or 3 weeks, you would not use it next year. So unfortunately, it's left with a situation where why would you be bothered to take it down? So the very cheapness of the object, I would argue, has in part devalued what it is.
OFMDFM department responsible for a flags protocol created in 2005. How have they responded to the substantive work that you've both produced?
Well, I mean, I think everyone has accepted the 2005 flags protocol is dead, Chair, so no one feels at all protective about it. But we've spoken to key players rather than a collective. I mean, we've had a lot of fairly energetic engagement with the PSNI over this and with others. And I think what everyone wants to see is some system of regulation, whether that's top-down or bottom-up. And I have to say, I mean, it was interesting to do this work because I started off with one kind of set of assumptions about what we were going to find. I thought we were going to come out in favour of some kind of licensing scheme. But in all honesty, the more we looked at it, the more impractical that seemed. I mean, generally speaking, this would appear to be the case, that the criminalisation of culture is nearly always a bad idea. This is about relationships between people and relationships between communities. If you do it all on a kind of thou shalt not basis, you know what's going to happen. They will. And so we looked at, you know, and it's still an option to look at scenarios where there is legislation, there is licensing, and actually, you know, when you try to change people's behaviours, you have to mix your carrots and your sticks a bit. So we looked at the idea of incentivising better behaviour by giving people, you know, additional resources if they comply with regulations. You know, you could get, we were talking about them earlier, you know, those stanchions that you can put the flags in. You could allow them access to cherry pickers to help them put flags up, provided they give you undertakings that they would take the flags down again. We looked at all of those things, and in the end, the problem with the licensing thing is, who's going to do the licensing? The district councils don't want it, the PSNI don't want it, the DRD doesn't want it. Then you have to look at who will apply for the licenses. And actually, since it's very unclear who puts flags up at times, that's going to be a problem. And then the third thing is, it's only going to work if there are penalties. And that means you would have to bite a bullet, and no matter how low you set the penalty, there will be people who either don't or won't pay it, and they're going to go to jail. And you know, if we go down that road, we've lost it. And so we've concluded that the legislative approach has to be kept in the background. But really, if we could get a voluntary protocol that people could sign up to, and what we're suggesting with the Liberty and Respect guidelines is that the PCSPs or some other equivalent structure should be used as a kind of brokerage when flags are going to go up in an area, and people can sit down in that community and look at that and say, well, how does that apply here? It says, for example, not outside schools, not outside hospitals, not outside churches. Let's make sure we're compliant with that. And we would hope that, again, because it's what we find consistently, people want one approach that would run across Northern Ireland. What we didn't want to do was underwrite the... We didn't want to conclude that there is a law in this country, but it's not adhered to. There is a police force, but it won't deal with the issue. There is a housing executive, there is a DRD. Nobody can deal with this problem. And therefore, you leave it up to the local tribal chieftains. We don't want to do that. We want to say, look, here's a set of guidelines that all reasonable people can subscribe to, and these are the ones that we want people to buy into. Can we make people buy into it? No, we can't. But what we're doing is putting it forward and seeing if the community leaders in the parties, in the loyal orders, in local community associations will buy into that. But if they don't, the problem continues.
How is that different to the flags protocol of 2005?
Well, I mean, I have issues with the flags protocol, but some of the substantive parts of it remain sensible and remain in, you know, what we have here. You're right. What we would need, I think, is it dealt with in a good deal more robust way. and an honest way than it has been up until now. I mean, the PSNI were regarded as the lead agency on that protocol. I don't think the protocol ever even appeared on their website. It was clear almost from day one that none of the agencies wanted really anything to do with it. There were local areas where people, but none of the stuff suggested in it was done. All right. So if this was to be attempted, there would need to be a more joined up and robust attempt to try and make it work.
I mean, what if you tell other licensing arrangements in society, by the way, this is just voluntary? What happens?
So what would happen in a parallel, like say
And another area of licensing in society?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because
Alcohol licensing,
well,
etc.
let's take one by way of
Voluntary.
example, Chris, to tease out your argument. Let's say at the moment we've an electoral commission and it licenses electoral posters, and that works. But that works because we know the parties actually all have office addresses, they have office bearers, we know who they are. That isn't the case with flags, and this is the problem. And that's why in the end, and this is what makes it different than the 2005 protocol, in the end this has to win bottom-up support. But look, here's where we took encouragement. We took encouragement that the place we got most traction was talking to people from loyalist working class communities. And that's where the problem is experienced at its worst. And people want change, and we have found that the people that you might have expected to be most resistant to it are willing to talk to us, to engage with us. Since we published this, we've had engagement with communities. They want to see something like this happen.
However, crucially, what some of the examples most progressive say there would be difficulties with that key element that you've just cited of knowing who is putting them up. Mm-hmm. So how do you overcome that?
Again, that has to be a bottom-up thing. I mean, at grassroots level, people actually do know who puts them up, and in fact, in most areas, people do know. I mean, where I live, people know who put them up. The problem is they come from outside the area, and that's the difficulty of accepting the idea that they're expressions of the community. They're not. They're very often imposed on communities. An illustration of that was the recent Spotlight programme about the Clandeboy estate, where the flags that were put up were not put up by the community. They did not express the community. They were the expressions of paramilitary muscle. And this does make the problem difficult. And there is no easy solution to this. What we're saying, again, is what we need to do is make a bit of progress. You know, we need to convince people that progress is possible. This set of proposals won't, you know, it's not going to solve all the problems. Yeah. But what we find with it, and I really have been encouraged by it. I mean, when we set about trying to deal with this, we had no idea what we could come up with. What we've come up with is modest, but it's like, you know, if you've got a window that's paint jammed, and you work at it and you get a little bit of movement, that's what we've got. And I think you take encouragement from that, because you know when you've got a little bit of movement, you can keep working at this. You know, this problem will get solved. All problems get solved in the end. What we're trying to suggest is we've done a little bit. Now it's time to pass the torch to somebody else, the new Flags Commissioner or whoever. But what we hope is that in tackling this problem, the most intractable problem, we are suggesting, you know what, we in Northern Ireland can solve these problems if we really want to.
Have you, very briefly, have you had any feedback from people who display flags in public spaces as to whether they would work to adopt the guidelines?
Well, what we've got, I mean, just to give you one example, because it is public, Jimmy Bryson has put it on his blog that he found all of this very interesting. He says 2 years ago he would have just binned this, but he thinks that loyalist communities need to engage with this, and that's what we're finding. And we take encouragement from it.
And so do you expect the Flags Commission to give it serious consideration?
Well, we would hope so, Chair. I mean, they're set up to explore the same set of issues. And, I mean, if you look at the list of people we consulted at the back, I mean, they're going to have to go and consult the same people. So I think we've done some of the initial work.
It will need, I think it does need the political parties to take a level of responsibility and leadership on this. And the example that I'll throw, because it always strikes me when I'm driving up the motorway and go past Sprucefield Park and Ride, there are a whole load of Union flags placed around a park and ride car park, all right, with no houses nearby, and you sort of think, is that what you want your unionist flag to be? You know, now what we have to have within groups and communities is saying it's about respect, and that has to feed through. It has to feed through from people in politics right the way down, that we want to do things different. And you can change. I do think we can change some of these things if we get the context right and put the right measures in place. I do think it can be made to work.
Yep. And I mean, look, this could all work if people get behind it. I mean, I would suggest that if these problems ever get solved, some of the ingredients, if not most of the ingredients, will be found in this report. Dominic and I aren't running the country.
Yep.
We're just two guys from Queens.
Nope.
So no surprise, two guys from Queens weren't able to make changes. But I would suggest to the politicians here that if you find solutions to these problems, they're pretty likely to be close to what we're putting in here.
I think you agree. We the elected
I
representatives, have to take responsibility.
I think it's important to put on record. I mean, there have been a lot of political parties that have been engaged, and I have to say quite genuinely and with integrity, and a long lot of discussions. And I remember one night looking at Richard Haas, looking at a clock, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I thought he was wasn't worrying about the time of the hour, well, century he was talking about. So a lot of people have put their shoulders away and try to get solutions to it, but it does require a lot of buy-in, a lot of that kind of hard work that Regenerate talked about and explained very well there, and other small groups doing similar types of work and elsewhere. So it's not to suggest that people haven't tried.
No, I mean, I'd like to say I've heard plenty of stories over the years of local councillors going out of their way to make sure. So I'm certainly not accusing everybody of that.
I'm just saying for the record.
Yeah.
I need to bring us to close, but Paul, you want a brief comment?
And I agree with that. There is a lot of work going on, and I am hopeful, optimistic as I may be, that politics will resolve the issue as opposed to make it worse. But the example you give of a car park in a retail area, that smacks to me of a lack of confidence, or even a siege mentality, which is slightly different from a lack of confidence, but still it gives you the same fear. And that's something that needs to be resolved, and I think if we resolve that issue, then the flags come down naturally. But it breaks my heart to see my flag upside down on that post. It breaks my heart to see my flag in tatters in October. So I would agree with you that there should be some sort of time bound. I think that's quite unacceptable. I really do. The problem is with the elongated marching season is that whilst in the middle of all that there are specific dates around history, significant dates, there is also a support mechanism where one band supports another band.
I know, the band.
At a band contest, parade. And that, for some of those people, are nearly as important as the spiritual
Yes, you're right.
historical day, because that's where their band is on a pedestal. That's when all these other bands come to support them. And if they're a village band, the only band in the village, well, they want their village to look glorious on their band parade. So there is. I take your point about special days, and the 1st of July is probably the most special. 12th of July is very important also in the context of Ireland. But more so than celebrating those days, I've always yearned for the day when people actually learn from those days and learn history. Because if you learn history, a lot of that confidence comes, and a lot of the threat, the under siege mentality goes. So if there's any way you could ever link the cultural expression to history and bring with it a respect and a pride, I think then that would go some way. But you understand what I say about the elongated marching?
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, I've mapped and followed the marching season for over 20 years now. I think, and I've seen the development of band parades, and in many ways, the development of band parades should be an indicator to the loyalist community of confidence. I mean, to a certain extent, I don't buy the idea that everything's being undermined, because I have watched and I've mapped the increased number of band parades. Some of the band parades are huge. You know, Market Hill and places like that. Ballymena have enormous band parades, and should be, in some ways, an indicator of the strength of these things. So I do sometimes wonder whether the discourse of saying we're under threat is actually missing the point. You have a vibrant cultural arena there, and people don't need to feel a lack of confidence. And if you've got a village which has a band parade, go out the day before, put the flags up, and take them down 2 or 3 days later. And I know that involves work, but it also makes the occasion that much more special.
No, I agree.
Okay. Dominic Brand, the Flags Commission and MLAs elected on May the 5th will have to show leadership on these issues. You have made a very useful contribution to help them to do that, so thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Listen to us.
Okay, members, agenda item 12 is any other business? No. Thank you for your attendance today and for your work on the committee, and wish you well going forward. All the best.